Everyone, I'm going to give you a minute to get in from the waiting room and get the closed captions up and running before we launch into the program. Okay, the closed captions should be up. You'll see a red live box at the top of your screen that you can click on to follow along with the closed captions. My name is Christy Baglow. I'm the Director of Statewide Training at Florida Legal Services. And I'm so excited about our lineup of panelists today to speak to us about advocating for consumers and tenants before the Florida Legislature. This is being recorded, but we're going to turn off the recording at the end for the question and answer session so that everyone can feel free to speak freely and ask all sorts of questions. You can put your questions in the Q&A box at any time during the webinar. That will make it easier for us to keep track at the end. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Laura Beckman.
Thanks, Christy, and thank you all for being here. We're really excited to have you here. This was a great project that we put together on behalf of the Public Interest Law Section and specifically with the Consumer and Tenant Work Group. So many thanks to those who are agreed to present today, and I think you're going to see that it's going to be a great program. Please feel free to post questions throughout the webinar. I'll be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A function. We're going to try to save as many questions as we can for the end, just so that we can get through all the material and everything that we are hoping to get through today. But please feel free to post those as you have them so that we can get to those at the end when we have time. And I also would like to make a plug for the Public Interest Law Section and specifically the Tenant and Consumer Work Group. If you are interested in these issues, if these are practice areas that you practice in regularly, we are your people. So please consider joining if you're not already a member. And if you are a member of PILS, please send me an email. I'll put my email address in the chat function, and we would love to have you as part of our work group. So our presenters today, we have a star-studded lineup. You can see their short bios here on the screen. Lynn Drysdale, I think everyone in Florida who practices consumer law must know Lynn or will get to know her shortly. She is one of my personal heroes, and she comes to us from Jacksonville Area Legal Aid and has been incredibly active in this area and has been a consumer expert both in Florida and throughout the country for many, many years. She has analyzed legislation and lobbied in the legislature for over 20 years, but I believe, Lynn, you're close to 50 years practicing. I think somewhere close to that. It's been very impressive career. Pretty much dedicated her career to this. And then we have Camilo Parra, who's also a member of PILS, who's with the Legal Aid of Orange County Bar Association. Camilo is a regular presenter on our PILS webinars, and we're very grateful to have him and his perspective as well. And then finally, Alice Vickers, who is a former chair of the Public Interest Law Section and has been incredibly valuable over more than 30 years, where she has been our resident expert and resource on all things legislative and has been very active in the consumer protection law. And so with that, I will turn it over to Lynn Drysdale.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for participating today. I just wanted to do a quick run through of the materials that will be provided. We probably won't discuss these at length during the webinar because we do have a short period of time, but I just wanted to let you know we have some examples, like a brief description of what happened during and after the Great Recession when foreclosure legislation was a hot topic in the legislature, and just the back and forth that went on during that period. Alice has put together a comprehensive list of tenant bills that were filed since 2006. I think this compilation of bills, both filed and passed, is very eye-opening and comprehensive and gives you an idea of the difficulty in trying to move an idea from a seed to a bill to a law in the Florida legislature. Also provided is the CLE information, the PowerPoint presentation, and a recording of the webinar.
If we may, while I'm honored to introduce Ms. Eskamani, she'll be back here later today. She's had a previous engagement, so when she returns, we will introduce Ms. Eskamani.
I am pleased to bring here today Ingrid Delgado, who has been the lobbyist for the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops since 2013. And we have been very lucky that one of the issues they follow is related to economic justice and most specifically predatory lending. So Ingrid has been very involved throughout her tenure at the legislature on a variety of topics related to predatory lending, and look forward to hearing her share a lot of the work she's done on those issues. She will be leaving us. She is so good that she has been sent to work in Washington, D.C. on these same issues. So we're lucky to have her just before she leaves.
And I'm honored to introduce David Cullen, who is a lobbyist for the Sierra Club, and he has been since 2008. He is deeply involved in grassroots efforts, organizing people to support or help defend a bill, and educational efforts. I think having David, who trades on his professionalism, in-depth knowledge, and ability to provide a wealth of information to lobbyists. Sometimes, particularly in the consumer world, we don't have a lot of money to put into the lobbying effort, but when we have people like Ingrid, David, and Alice involved, their reputations precede them, and so it gives them credibility that we need. So we so appreciate it. And just one more point to point out that we don't, our allies in either getting legislation through through the legislative process or defending legislation depends on coalitions of a lot of different groups. And the Sierra Club is one that was very involved in the PACE legislation efforts. And so we certainly appreciate everything that David has done in that area.
So this slide, the nuts and bolts, it's really the takeaway here is we need to get involved immediately. There's a lot of important deadlines here to take note of. And I just want to make sure everyone's aware that if you're thinking of getting involved come September, it may already be too late. You need to start looking into how can we prepare right now. There is no time to waste. And here's a slide that these questions, I'd love to ask them specifically to Representative Eskamani. So let's come back to this. Here's a good time for me to kind of explain why I'm here. I'm not sure anyone who's here today even recognizes me. I've just entered the legal aid organization world, and this past legislative cycle was my very first time actually following along with legislation. And I gotta tell you, it felt a whole lot like watching an underdog story where the hero dies at the end. I spent the whole legislative cycle seeing all these bills that were really exciting, things that could benefit our tenants. And I got to tell you, here as a housing attorney in Florida for the legal aid world, tenants need it. Tenants, we've identified for years now all these issues tenants have had, and we recently had an influx of bills that might have helped. And it was at the end of the legislative cycle when everything had died out that I finally realized, I'm not sure if I could have made a difference, but why didn't I try? And that's when I actually reached out to my office and I said, I'd really like to register as a lobbyist. And they were really excited for me to take that step. So that's why I'm here today, to learn with the rest of you of how can we actually bring on some change, some much needed change in our legislature.
All right, so let's get down to some of those nuts and bolts. The first thing we want to look at is on affirmative legislation, which would be legislation that you would seek to file as opposed to defending against a bad bill. how do you analyze whether it is feasible for you or your office or your nonprofit to move forward with an idea? And so I can't say I have the answer for how a nonprofit might determine that. But I do think it's really important that you consider all your options, because it is very time consuming if you really want to push legislation. So you need to consider, do you have time to collect stories and data? Drafting the bill language is just the first step. You've got to have some information to back it up. Can you find partners who will agree with the position that you have? That is a lot of work. You need to go to a variety of organizations, individuals. You have to explain the issue to them. You have to try to get them on board to join you in your effort moving forward. Very importantly, and I think Lynn might speak to this later, can you travel to Tallahassee on short notice to testify? You at some point need to be in Tallahassee, and unfortunately it is in the northern part of the state, far away from many of you. So that's a factor that you definitely need to consider. Is there another organization that could take the lead? Maybe you can't get to Tallahassee. Is there some other organization you could ask? Is this an issue that, for example, the bishops would support? Or could you reach out to Sierra Club and many, many other organizations that might be able to help you? Can you hire a lobbyist? Is there someone on the ground in Tallahassee that you can look to and pay to push your issue forward? Can you find other funding? Occasionally, there is funding on particularly consumer issues. Places like Center for Responsible Lending, Americans for Financial Reform, the Consumer Federation occasionally have funding to work on some specific issues. Then, how will you measure success? And this is something maybe other panelists want to weigh in either now or later. Many bills are filed, several thousand, maybe 300 pass in a good year, but there are reasons to file a bill beyond maybe having it pass. Are you going to educate legislators about the issue? Are you going to educate the public? I see Ingrid nodding. Did you have something to share about this, Ingrid?
Just to echo what you're saying, I did look it up just before we got on here, and 3,140 bills were filed in the 2021 session, and 275 of them were sent to the governor, right? So the reality is that most bills are not going to get a committee hearing, are not going to be sent to the governor. We still do the work. I know that the conference has worked on some issues for 20 years, right? Before we actually have it passed and sent to the governor, but it still has a purpose each and every session, right? We can write op-eds about it. We can have press conferences. We can just educate members about it. So just because something doesn't pass that session doesn't mean that we still, don't do the work.
Okay.
So just to speak briefly about drafting bill language and white papers or position papers, I feel like my role over the past couple of decades is to be completely dependent on Alice to tell me what to do and when to do it. And I know that Ingrid and David have similar people that they are getting involved, but I've heard over the past couple of months of ideas that people would like for affirmative legislation. And the thought process is you come up with a great idea for legislation, you do some publicity about it, and then it'll just take off. And the next thing you know, the governor will sign the bill. And this may sound somewhat like I'm trying to convince you that it's a bad idea to get involved, but actually it's the complete opposite of that. If one person is trying to do all of this, it's impossible. If we work together as a coalition of consumer advocates of all types, then we can get this done, but it is a lot of work. And if you have an idea, if you want to start out by drafting a bill that you would like for a lot of the consumer advocates to consider and perhaps weigh in on, that would be the first step. And you could look at past legislation to see examples of what a bill should look like. If you're just trying to get a bill amended, you could look at how to add and delete language. If you're trying to defeat a bill, then you may want to draft legislation that is completely opposite, or at least a nice compromise of the bill that you're trying to defeat. And so that's just the drafting that gets you in the door. But as Alice has stated, the next step is to try to find a sponsor, both in the House and in the Senate, who has clout, who agrees with what you have drafted, who is in it wholeheartedly, and who has the ability to work with their fellow legislators to get legislators to get them involved in the fight. So what you will need in addition to drafting the bill are position papers to explain what the issues are and how your draft fixes it. You will need clients galore. You will need a whole list of stories of consumers who have been harmed. You will need at least 2 or 3 or 4 or as many as you can get of those consumers to drop everything and travel to Tallahassee to testify on very short notice. You need to be able to drop everything and travel to Tallahassee on very short notice. And if it weren't for Alice, I would not have known where to park, where to sit, where to stand, what to say. It was very helpful. But all of those things, it's a very different world in Tallahassee, just to say the least. So, but those things, if you're committed to getting a bill passed, you are also happy to do those sorts of things. And I understand that not everybody can drop everything on a dime and do this, but again, with a whole group of us willing to do this, it is something that can be done. Press conferences need to be organized, and consumers may be able to weigh in that way. What I always heard when traveling over from Jacksonville is legislators sit and they hear the same very knowledgeable people speak generally, who are there day to day, to which we're indebted. I can't overstate that. But if a person who is not in Tallahassee, in the Tallahassee circle, and they show up and they're kind of a new face before the legislature, sometimes they get a minute more of the attention of the legislators who seem to wander in and out of the room when you're talking. But if you can get a human being that has been harmed by the practice you're trying to get fixed, that human being is going to make all the difference to the committees that you're testifying before and everyone else. So it takes a lot of work. We're not asking anybody to do all of this on their own. But I can tell you that with title loans, payday loans, foreclosure statute, these battles take years. And so sometimes a victory was defeating a bad bill. Sometimes a victory, or lesser times a victory in the past decade or so, has been getting really nice affirmative legislation passed. And sometimes, most oftentimes, there's legislation passed that's a compromise. And I think the payday lending bill and the foreclosure bill are prime examples of that. But also, well, let me stop there, because that's an awful lot for people to digest. And I'm telling you, it sounds like a lot, but together, it's no big deal. We can do this.
I just wanted to point out real quick on the drafting and white paper, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. For example, I noticed that numerous times there are, over the years, there have been attempts to pass protections for tenants who have suffered domestic violence stalking, other sexual violence. And I can see that each time the bills are a little bit different. My point being that a good thing to do if you have an issue that appears that is important to you and you want to go forward, search on flsenate.gov or myfloridahouse.gov. You can search legislation going back several decades now. It's wonderful. You can search by the chapter number, by the section number. You can find bills that have already been drafted and you can see how they progressed and maybe you can look at bill analyses of that legislation. So again, don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. It's time consuming to do that. White papers, I just threw up an example there of a first page of a white paper. It's not a brief. It's not your PhD dissertation. It's a fairly quick write of your position on the bill, and you're doing some arguing, but trying to be balanced. So, you know, these are not things you need to labor over. You need to move quickly through them.
Alice, Representative Eskamani has arrived.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. I know I'm just popping in, popping out, but really glad to be here. I just want to say thank you for everyone's incredible leadership. I know so many of these panelists, so it's great to see folks from Sierra Club and Catholic bishops and just incredible consumer advocates. I think y'all just want to kind of get an inside scoop real quick about working with the legislature. Is that correct? Just want to make sure I provide information that's useful for folks.
That is correct.
Okay, perfect. Well,
honor to have you here today. Thank you so much for your efforts in supporting the tenants in our community. And here's on this slide is just a few questions that we were hoping you could just give us a little bit of from your perspective, like, you know, how could we tackle controversial or niche legislation? Maybe that's a good place to start.
I love it. I love it. So my first thought is something called power mapping, which I feel like almost everyone has done before. Maybe we don't call it power mapping, but essentially when we're talking about any type of consumer rights, and specifically we focus on tenant issues and issues for our renters, we know that there are some forces out there who oppose us, right? And it's not necessarily even well known in the greater public, because I think when you talk to the greater public about renters' rights, for example, or eviction diversion, there tends to be some pretty good support for that. But then when you talk to that elected official, they probably heard from organizations that contrast on those positions, such as the Florida Apartment Association, or perhaps a property management group, or a collection of individual landlords, whatever that opposition is. We want to try to build support among them, right, as much as we can. And so the first thought of power mapping is that you basically, you have your decision maker. In this case, it can be a lawmaker that you're trying to get them to vote yes on the bill, or sponsor the bill, or co-sponsor the bill, and who influences them in their separate networks. And to that point too, if you can identify other legal aid or advocates in that district, or even landlords in that district who support this bill, trying to identify those different stakeholders to just give more weight to your advocacy and to your ask is really, really impactful. Because I will tell you that as I have championed renters' rights and renters' issues or other consumer advocate issues, I get a lot of pushback. You know, I get angry emails from landlords who don't understand like why I have this position. So I have to take the time to walk through my values on these issues. But if we do that work in advance, then you're not going to see that backlash as much, but you're also going to be able to actually go to lawmakers and say, we have this coalition of landlords, or the Florida Apartment Association is neutral on this bill. And you can be able to kind of come to the space, with those facts and any of those myths debunked, to focus once more on the directly impacted person, to focus on that consumer. Thinking even from a bigger picture perspective, I do think that in the Florida legislature, to be successful, we have to be bipartisan. We have some really fantastic colleagues on the other side of the aisle that do care about these issues. And, I do serve on civil justice, which is a very interesting space because a lot of the fights are trial attorneys versus corporations, but there are moments, especially on issues like opioids or issues that have transcend party lines, where my Republican colleagues, they side with the trial attorneys. And so being able to build those relationships across the aisle is also super important, because again, when things get hot, you want to make sure that you built those relationships so that that lawmaker can come to you for advice or come to you, get their questions answered, and be ready in that committee space to be able to debunk any of the misinformation and of course, vote yes on that bill. I also just want to add to that relationship building is a very big part of this work. And I don't have to tell folks here that, you know, everyone builds relationships with your professional colleagues and, you know, folks in different organizations that ally on issues. But that relationship with the lawmaker is also really, really important. And there are going to be times where you don't agree with everything, but to find the areas of common ground and for that lawmaker to also recognize you, to say, oh, that person's my constituent. We went to law school together. We, you know, both served on these nonprofit boards together. That goes back to the power mapping point that I made earlier. But what I find to be so incredible about the legislative process is, like, many lawmakers are attorneys, right? I'm not. I feel like I am, but I'm not. Many are. And there's like so many relationships where it's like, oh yeah, we worked at Hall and Night together, or you know, we go to the same church together, went to law school together. So those relationships actually do matter. So when we're talking about trying to push a lawmaker to vote yes with us on a bill or to co-sponsor a bill, we will legit sit there and think like, well, who knows this person at a deeper level, or you know, has that type of relationship that can have a conversation that's one-to-one, where the lawmaker is going to be more likely to listen and be open to feedback because of that personal relationship already established. The last thing I'll say too is, if we can find examples, and this was kind of discussed as I was hopping in, examples from other states, that's super, super helpful, especially if you can find states that are politically similar to Florida. So if, you know, there's examples of local municipalities or state legislatures that have also passed different consumer protections, you know, renters bill of rights, or eviction diversion, or rental assistance, or pro bono, you know, support for pro bono aid services, to be able to also paint the picture to what is now currently a Republican majority legislature, to say other states like Florida have done this. That's super helpful. So also kind of think about your national network, and what leverage do we have to also paint the picture in Florida that these are not, you know, red versus blue issues. These are just really good human issues. And there actually is a lot of Republican support in other states for it as well. And so I'll step back. I'm happy to see folks have any questions. I know I'm almost at my time, so I want to be sensitive to the rest of the presentation, but super glad to be here. And to any of my constituents who are on, you know, thank you so much for trusting me to serve. And if you're not a constituent, District 47 is the city of Orlando, Winter Park, Belle Isle, and Edgewood. So you've probably come to the courthouse here, and have been a part of our district, and just really proud to serve this sweet town, and happy to see what questions folks have.
Thank you so much, Representative Eskamani. That was really insightful. And if I could just steal one more question from you, because you addressed the first two we had here perfectly. Didn't even have to ask the second one. How would you define success as far as the legislative process? It was a question we were trying to kind of nail down earlier, but from your point of view, what is a success? Whether it passes, doesn't pass?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So on issues so I didn't talk about this too much, but power mapping also ties into building relationships specifically with leadership. And so both the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus have a minority, you know, we have a minority leader and a pro tem. They have the majority leader and the speaker, right? So those are some of the players that are also just really important to get to know. And if you can build a relationship with the incoming leadership, that's also even better for pre-planning. For example, this speaker we have right now, Speaker Chris Sprouse, he terms out. And when he terms out, Paul Renner, Representative Paul Renner, or Chair Renner, because he chairs the Rules Committee, he will become the next speaker. And he right now serves the Jacksonville area. To build a relationship with Chair Paul Renner is really smart right now, because when he becomes speaker, his schedule is going to be more difficult to get in, but you want to be able to plant some seeds of what would be your priorities next session when he does become speaker, because chances are you might get a bill filed going into next session. I mean, even just thinking about the eviction expungement bill that Representative Vantalupas had, that bill made it, on the House floor. It did not pass the Senate, and I know he's going to try again. It takes time, it takes multiple times, but if we can get buy-in from leadership, then that will help make sure the bill does move from its first committee to the House floor. And if you do the same on the Senate side, to have a replicate on the Senate. But if leadership doesn't care about the issue, or doesn't like the issue at hand, or doesn't like how the bill is phrased, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you've gotten it through all your committees, but you can't get on the floor. And then, of course, the other part of this coin is the governor, right? And because the governor has veto power. So if the governor doesn't like your bill, you might have went through all those efforts and then it gets the chopping block. So think about the leadership you want to build a relationship with as well. And then what does success look like? So I do think success can be measured by movement of a bill. Like, I think that just because a bill didn't pass its first time, you should still take a lot of pride in the fact that you got it as far as you did. And that's for any bill that you're working on. I think you can feel like you did a good job in the sense that you got it to move. But of course, the ultimate success is the passage of a bill and getting it signed into law. Or if you're looking for funding for a project, is getting that budget item into the state budget and not vetoed by the governor. But again, to celebrate those small victories, I don't think we do that enough. I think we often look at it as a zero-sum game. And you're just going to be continuously, depressed and upset if that's the case, because this work it takes, progress is not linear, right? It comes in zig and zags. You have to be ready to go with those punches. And just get up and keep trying again. So this is the perfect time to be having those conversations, because bill drafting is now open, which means we can start putting bills into draft and then file them. And we'll be back in Tallahassee in September. So this is perfect timing to map out what are your goals for this session. And if the goal is we want to get a bill, past both chambers into the governor's desk, then let that be the goal, but don't be shy. 6 months from now, look back and say, we made progress, because the fact that you're having this conversation, that consumer rights are going to be part of the debate among members, is really, really important. Because I don't have to tell this group that last session was a very sad session for consumer rights. I mean, so much access to the courts was taken away. The one good, criminal legal system bill we had for juveniles was vetoed. There were so many incredible bills filed that never got that hearing. And so don't let that impact your morale. It is so important that we stay focused on your short-term goals, but also your long-term goals. And I think that if you have both, it kind of keeps you focused over time.
That was nothing short of inspiring. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. I'm actually dual Zooming right now, so I'm going to hop on my other Zoom that I have on my phone right now. But I am going to drop my email in the chat if folks want to keep in touch with me. I'll put my social media handles too, if that's preferred as a way to stay in touch. But please let us know how we can support you. We work really closely with our legal aid community in Orange County, and of course with the Florida Bar Foundation as well. So if you need anything at all, please let us know. And just thank you so much again for your incredible advocacy and for being there for everyday people, especially during the pandemic. I know that our civil legal aid community is underpaid and overworked. We recognize that. We're trying to make it better from the operational perspective as well. So just know that you have lawmakers that have your back and care about this work and are really excited to work with you as well.
Such an honor to have you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. All right, that was really just encouraging and such a great addition. It's always wonderful when we can hear from legislators who are as open as Representative Eskamani and can share those little nuggets of wisdom. So picking back up on affirmative legislation and moving it through the legislature, that after you've come up with an issue you think might be feasible, that's important, after you've contemplated your drafting of the language and any supporting documents you think would help you, you're ready to march to the Capitol and try to get somebody like Representative Eskamani to sponsor your bill. So I thought it would be helpful to have Ingrid share the work that she did when a payday loan rate cap bill was filed in both houses. So Ingrid?
Thank you. Happy to share, and not easy to follow the representative, right? It's really great because she talks so much about building relationships, and quite literally the first word in my notes to speak on this slide is about building relationships. I'll go really quickly to something Camilo said a little while ago, which was about the timing, right? So ideally, you would have a bill that is filed in both chambers, right? Florida House, Florida Senate. In general, right, those bills are referenced to 3 committees in each chamber, and then they're voted on by the full chambers on the floor, right? And you want all of that to happen before the end of session, or you have to start it all over again the following session, right? But really, this goes by very, very quickly. When we have to do the heavy lifting, right? So if something's already the priority of leadership, they pass in the blink of an eye, right? They can be, filed in one chamber, referenced to one committee, you get 48-hour notice that it's going to be heard, and boom, it's on the floor. But really on the, majority of bills, we as advocates need to do the heavy lifting. And so, for example, as Rep. Eskamani mentioned, in September, we're going to start having committee meetings for the 2022 session. 2 bills have already been filed in the House for the 2022 session. At the end of the 2021 session, I was talking to members of the House about 2022 priorities, and they had already committed their slots, right? So really the time is now to start talking to members about your priorities, about the things that you're seeing on the ground and the need for change, in Florida statutes. One way that we have found sponsors for our bills is through our candidate questionnaire project. So the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops, during every election year, we send a series of questions to those who are running to see where they land on different issues of priorities, right? And so we have pretty regularly included a consumer protection issue in there. And so a few years ago, we asked about the 36% APR, right, the rate cap on small dollar loans. And we were able to look, on a spreadsheet, what members were, supportive of the issues, which, opposed our position, and who still had questions. And so what I like to call the trifecta, right? Alice Vickers representing the Florida Alliance for Consumer Protection, Pamela Birch-Fort, who was representing the NAACP, and myself, we would run like down the halls of the, both House members and Senate members' offices, trying to educate them on the issue, answer any, concerns that they had, and trying to find a sponsor. So if your organizations, if you're on boards, for example, that care about these issues, think about potentially asking questions about those issues on a candidate questionnaire, and it'll give you a good snapshot of who might make a good sponsor. It's almost more of a priority to get a House member first, because they have a cap of how many bills they can file, right? Right now it's 7. Senate members can file an unlimited amount of bills, and some do. Some file 70, 80, ridiculous amount of bills. They don't have a cap. So really, just to echo what Rep. Eskamani mentioned, the priority really is relationship building with members and relationship building with fellow advocates.
Great. Yes, that's exactly what is so important in terms of that relationship building. And as Ingrid alluded to, part of my work was building a relationship with Ingrid and with the NAACP lobbyists. And and this year more closely with David Cullen on the PACE loan legislation. But before we leave this panel, I did want to point out the reason I posted this letter was in preparing for this, the legal services attorneys on our panel were discussing LSC programs and their concern about engaging in legislative work. I'm not going to address that issue, but I did want to point out I found this old letter from 2011 where the Housing Umbrella Group was asked by committee to weigh in on changes to Chapter 83. So I did want to point out that you are able, I do know you are able to respond to direct requests to weigh in on legislative issues. So if a legislator asks for your opinion, someone like Representative Eskamani, that's your entree to create some kind of dossier around the issue. So that avenue is available, and you all are an important resource on these issues to the legislature. I know the Consumer Protection Law Committee regularly sends letters to legislators, letting them know that they are available as a resource. So something you may want to consider doing with your legislative delegation. So moving on to defending against bad legislation, I wanted to ask David Cullen with the Sierra Club to just share with us his own experience this year with the PACE loan bill. That's the property assessed clean energy legislation that probably most people on this call are somewhat familiar with what that is. So David, you want to share with us how that played out for you?
Sure. I want to start by saying that climate change, Sierra Club, the national organization, and Sierra Club Florida see climate change as an existential issue. And when the PACE program first came to our attention, we were in favor of it as a means of expanding and advancing rooftop solar and distributed generation in general, particularly solar in the state of Florida. We didn't do too much with it past trying to get the legislature to actually implement the 2008 constitutional amendment that said that the legislature would be able to exempt solar and hurricane protections from ad valorem taxation. That does tie in one way and another to the PACE program. It took them 5 years to actually do that. In terms of building relationships, this was an example where Alice Vickers actually was the one who reached out, because one of the things that happens in the Florida legislature is that the House requires all registered lobbyists to indicate the issues and the bills on which they're going to speak or on which they may speak with a legislator. And Alice went through the list looking at PACE, and there was a bill in 2020 by Representative Zika 225, which dealt with PACE and would have imposed a series of consumer protection requirements. And she saw that I had registered to speak to that bill. At that point, I had no idea what was in the bill. I just knew that it was out there. It was related to renewable energy. And she reached out and said, well, I hope you're not going to oppose this bill. And she came up to Tallahassee and met with Deb Foote, who at that time was our acting chapter director and still is, and myself, and explained some of the issues with the PACE program from the consumer protection standpoint. And since Sierra Club is a volunteer-driven organization, I took that information back to our lobbying advisory committee and explained what some of the issues were with the PACE program and some of the problematic behaviors that were going on, upselling to people who didn't understand what they were being conned into, uh, essentially a whole bunch of issues that were just uh, very predatory towards consumers and that were resulting in severe financial hardship for them. Uh, and that's not what we're about. We do want to increase renewable energy and solar, but we don't want to do it on the backs of the poorest and least financially able people in the state of Florida. There's a saying that if you want to change everything, you need everybody. And Sierra Club believes that, and particularly in the past 5 years, has really focused on equity, inclusion, and justice in our policy decisions. And that was a large part of what turned it's not that we oppose PACE overall, but we are if you're going to do PACE, it has to be done in a way that is protective of consumer rights. So that's basically where we came down on the bill. This past year, we had 387 and 1208 by Representative Randy Fine and Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez. Representative Fine's bill made it through all of its committees, but it died on second reading. And it kind of went up and down. One of the things that you do need to be prepared for in working with legislation is that things can change on a dime. You can have a bill that is, I think the PACE bill was maybe 20 pages. And in the last committee, a proposed committee substitute came in that changes a whole bunch of things, and you have very little time to analyze it and find out exactly what's in it. Bottom line, Representative Fine's bill was a considerable improvement over the current statute and current regulations. It could still go a distance farther. So we'll see what happens in coming years. I'm sure we will see that again, but that's really part of our story, is that with respect to relationships, in this case, it was a relationship that Alice reached out and brought us information that we didn't know, because I'm pretty good on water quality law and growth management law, and there are a whole bunch of chapters, and public interest, consumer protection is not necessarily where I am an expert and Alice is. So it's great to have her expertise available, and I can bring that value added to our organization, and hopefully we can do the same thing for you folks and for other organizations as well, when we're all trying to address the public interest.
Okay, great. And just to be clear, everybody, I am retired. So we're looking for new folks to step in here. It's in many ways it's not rocket science in terms of the running down the halls and making those connections. It takes a lot of energy. But as David said, it's just building, and in Ingrid, it's building those connections and trying to find common ground. So on this PACE loan bill, it was really a coup to get Sierra Club to join us at one point in opposing the bill, because many of the legislators were assuming this was a pro environmental bill. So that was important. So just real quickly, I wanted to throw out there to all of our panelists the idea of, can a bill be fixed? When you're defending a bill, that's often the first question you will hear from a legislator when you go to meet with them. So I was hoping maybe, Ingrid, you could describe a hostile amendment in terms of the amendatory process.
Sure. So number one, any bill can be fixed, right? Even the worst bill in the world, you can offer something called a delete all amendment, which replaces the whole entire bill, right? You don't only have to think about like moving commas and periods and rephrasing things. You can completely replace all of the language of a bill. But specifically, a hostile amendment is something that the bill sponsor hasn't vetted or approved, right? And a lot of times that's asked in committee or on the floor. Is this a friendly amendment? So I always recommend that as you're considering amendments to any bill, that you first approach the sponsor, and you can often find common ground. You can show that you really are, thoughtful. And also, I recommend, not giving up on people after the first conversation. I have literally had the same conversation on the same bill with the same member like 10 times, saying the same things. And finally on the 10th time, they're like, you know what, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's like the muscle memory thing. And then all of a sudden they become your greatest advocate. So always, talk to the sponsor first and don't give up on them.
Alice, you're muted.
Lynn, as somebody who has drafted tons of amendments, can you share what it's like for you in terms of carving that time out? I think you spoke to that a little bit before, but maybe most specifically in the work you've done amending bills, creating that language.
Yes, thank you. Really, and I want to walk back a little bit what I said earlier about how difficult it is to drop everything and travel to Tallahassee and get clients to do so. There are a lot of ways that people can help through the legislative process just by sitting in their office desk and reaching out to clients, reaching out to legislative aides, creating stories, and reaching out to legislators and their aides themselves, having clients do so. So there are, although it may be a last minute ask many times, a lot of the stuff you can do from your own home or office and are very easy to do. And as far as drafting, generally the bills I have looked at have not been 20 pages, although the foreclosure bill probably came close, and you're able to look at it and it's very easy just to run through and edit. Really is all you're doing, a bill to add some things that you might think make the bill more palatable, or add some things that you think would maintain the intent of the bill, but create more consumer friendly provisions. So it's not as if it's always easier for me to take what I call go-bys, politely, and edit them as opposed to create my own bill or thoughts. And so editing a bill that is potentially helpful, but just needs a little extra for consumers, or that's potentially harmful, but could be easily fixed by adding a couple of phrases or words, is really not that difficult. And you can even get it in Word format. So it's a very user-friendly thing to do.
And also you can do it quickly, and because often people like David or Ingrid, they call and they say, we need an amendment now. So it's also something that you've got to be prepared to do very quickly. David, I was going to ask you, do you go in and testify without talking to anybody? We had this discussion during session briefly, because I know you don't do that. So could you share your thoughts on that?
Well, not counting this past year where it was very, very difficult to speak with anyone. Do try to meet with legislators in advance. You try, obviously what you're going to try and do is, with a bill that you like, try and speak with the chair so that you can get the bill agended. And then you would run to your ranking member, and go through the leadership of the committee, speak to committee members. In an ideal world, that's what you would do. And you do that for every bill that you're covering. And same thing for bills that you opposed, you would go to the chair and try to convince them not to agenda the bill, that sort of thing. A great resource is the committee staff on both sides. You have very experienced people working in the committee staff. They are not specifically beholden to the ideas or beliefs of the individual senators or representatives. They're staff, and they are pretty good at remaining unbiased. And they can give you really good background information and understanding of the legislation. And you can even talk to them about proposed amendments that you think would be good to have. And they will work with you because they're used to dealing with legislative language. There is also the bill drafting manuals are available online. It's good to go through that. If you're considering doing amendments, look at those bill drafting manuals in advance for the House and Senate. They have somewhat different styles, but that is a very valuable resource. So we try to speak to people in advance, particularly the sponsor of the bill, particularly if you're going to oppose the bill. It's an etiquette thing. But you can't let, or at least Sierra Club cannot let that get in the way of our job, which is laid out in the lobbying rules, which is to bring the position of the organization that we represent to the legislature. And if the only opportunity to do that is in a committee hearing, then that's what you take. And you want to have your comments have to be brief. You should never plan to speak for more than 2.5 to 3 minutes. If they ask questions, then that's time they're giving you. Then you can answer the questions, but make your most important points up front and try and make it always stay on the topic of the bill. Always stay on what is actually in the bill, not hypotheticals. That's an important thing to do, and it makes it possible for the legislators to at least understand what you're trying to say, whether they agree with you or not. Finally, it's a matter of persistence. Chris Costello, who is one of our organizers, says, the secret is to stay in the ring and keep swinging. I've been playing defense for the entire time I've been with Sierra Club. That is, I think I'm going into my 15th year representing them, and that's what we do. We stay in the ring and we keep swinging. And even when you're not getting anywhere in committee in terms of looking at progress, if you can get in the press and get your story out there, then that will change the way the electors look at the next election, and that may be where your success is.
All right. Well, we are coming near the end of our hour, so I'm going to give it to Camilo to round us up here.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, this was just as much a learning experience for me as it was for most of our attendees, I'm sure. I have 3 words that are kind of my takeaway, and the 3 words that I'm going to make it a mission to put at the forefront of all my efforts moving forward. And it's proactivity, persistence, and personal relationships. That's kind of my takeaway. So I'll just read the rest of the slide, but that's what I'm trying to take away from today. So of course, we got to be able to identify the issues, and we got to be able to show their issues. The most convincing way I think of to do such is to get your data correct. Make sure you have information backing up what is the need. Have stories, have personal stories of actual clients that you know. Prepare for these sessions, prepare for these hearings. Don't sleep on it. There's no time to lose. Build those coalitions, work on those relationships from everyone on any side of the aisle in any part of the process. Build those relationships. They're helpful. Get your clients involved. Their stories are probably the most meaningful part of this to really hit home, really show people there is a need for this legislation, and then communicate with the legislatures and with the committee staff, just going right back into that personal relationship. And I really hope that people learned as much as I did today, and I hope people are as fired up as I am to get involved.
Well, thank you, everyone. I particularly want to thank, obviously, Representative Eskamani, even though she had to leave us early. It's very special for her to take time. Ingrid, on her last week here in Florida, so wonderful to have her share her vast knowledge. David, who has been doing this for a long time, and just really grateful that you are sharing your wisdom with us. So on that, I'll pass it over to Christy. Do we have any?
Thank you to all of the panelists. That was fantastic. I definitely learned a lot. I did want to announce the CLE. The number is 5372. Again, it's 5372. And I'll send out the recording, the CLE info, and the materials tomorrow. I don't see any questions at the moment, so I'll give everyone a minute if they have any questions. But also be sure to check out the public interest law website, which I will put in the chat again. And I really appreciate the Pills for co-sponsoring this webinar. They have a great new website, so definitely get involved. That's how to meet wonderful people like the ones on this panel. And as Laura said at the beginning, be sure to get involved in the work groups. This specifically was put together by the consumer and tenant work groups. So amazing work on getting such a great lineup of panelists. I don't see any questions, so I guess everyone is shy today. But thank you all so much for bringing this webinar to our statewide audience. I hope you all have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.